This is Tyler Dixon, and I'll be doing my questions 1 through 3 on page 332, case study 6, reorganizing human resources at ASP software. My response to question 1 is as follows. Well, in this case study, there was an identifiable problem that Susan had recognized, and she's trying to bring about a change to fix it. Susan has reached out to Nathan for assistance with changing the company's model from a functional model to a full client management service model, which requires a lot of teamwork, as we could expect. Some of the problems mentioned in this case study is a small reduction in staff, unhappy internal client managers, poor recruiting methods, and the process for hiring employees is simply taking too long and is too intricate. Susan, who is the client, in my opinion, feels like she has done everything in her power to make this change as smooth as possible, but she has encountered problems that require outside help. Henceforth, she has contacted Nathan. Susan's plans, in my opinion, were well thought out. In the case study, we can see where she has attempted to make diagrams that gave Nathan a starting point or idea of what Susan is looking for. Personally, as I mentioned in the text, I feel like the emotions are split among the employees regarding the change. New leaders will take positions, and as with any job, the workers are on edge regarding how their new boss will be. The main concern of all the employees that I gather is whether they will have a job, and considering that the management team know they will all have a job, they're more susceptible to the changes. The workers are the primary, or the generalists, are the primary ones that are on edge regarding the change because they're not sure whether they are going to lose their job or not. Question 2. Just this week in chapter 12, as I recall from studying my lesson this week, on page 320, there is a paragraph regarding strategic plan design. The strategic change plan not only outlines the major activities, but also attempts to combat the impact the change will have on the stakeholders, which I feel that Susan has done really well with her planning. As many of us have experienced, Susan has simply just reached a brick wall, so to speak, and this is the reason why she has contacted Nathan. With my knowledge, Susan has succeeded in planning the major activities, but it seems to me as if she needs assistance with combating the possible resistance within the work group. Therefore, she has attempted to minimize as much resistance as possible. One thing Susan could have done differently is provide comfort for the hourly or non-management employees, or in this case, the generalists. She knows that the generalists are facing high anxiety, but when consulting with Nathan, it sounds to me as if she's letting this pass. And what they're anxious about is the staffing reduction. And the management team could possibly face anxiety also when Steve received his promotion. What I would do if I was Susan would be, for starters, explain the exact plans to the generalists and possibly hold a minor question and answer section after work hours to relieve some of the questions and stress that the generalist and management team is experiencing. Also, I will hold a simple meet and greet to possibly show the work group that Stephen is qualified for the job. The work group can get to know their new boss or their new leader, and that Stephen can get to know the work group also. And that goes for showing degrees or past experiences, or even have one of his past employees come talk to Stephen, since in the text it says that he was well liked at his old job. And then our next is question 3. Well, in chapter 12, again, it mentions 3 primary characteristics of large-scale interventions, which this classifies as a large-scale intervention, which are the involvement of a wide variety of participants, greater timeline of the intervention, and a change in the consultant's role. If I was giving advice to Susan, I would follow these 3 simple steps. To get everyone involved, I will host a question and answer session, as I mentioned above, to answer any of the concerns that the work group may have, such as who will be losing their job, if anyone, since there will be staffing reduction. Also, as I mentioned before, I will host a meet and greet session with Stephen as a leader. Next, I will gradually unfreeze past practices. As mentioned earlier in the chapter, unfreezing mean is taking the old practices out, pretty much. That's quotations. But I will unfreeze the practices as opposed to making a drastic change overnight, so to speak. Big organization changes such as this requires time in order for it to work as planned. I would set small goals for myself to accomplish over the period of a year. Lastly, the leaders are in position. I will ask them to closely observe how the changes affect the work group, and even provide data that will alert me to whether my changes are working for the better or worse. Susan would take the role of participation, getting the work group involved. The measurement team will provide Susan with the data so she can analyze the data to see how effective her changes are. And lastly, the consultant should think of ways to bring the teams together and clean the models that Susan has constructed up, which means also creating different various tactics to get them to work together as a team. Okay? The 3 questions I just answered were, how does the client feel about how the change has been managed at this point? How do you think the management team or employees feel? That's question 1. Well, has Susan done well in managing the change to this point? What could she have done differently? That's question 2. And what intervention strategy and intervention activities would you recommend to Susan? How will you structure these activities? And what roles would Susan, the management team, and the consultant play?